Hey folks, welcome to Got Your Back. Emergency bonus pod. Big trade in the National Hockey League today. The Vancouver Canucks, who probably have gotten more airtime on this podcast than any other team this year, finally get that deal done. Bo Horvat, now a member of the New York Islanders. Today's bonus episode brought to you by our good friends at Cross Country Canada Supplies and Rentals, Pro Hockey Life, and Liberty Smart Security as well. Not going to be a full-size podcast today, just a quick hitter. So we're not going to waste a ton of time. We're going to get right to the fellas. Pierre LeBrun is working the phones as we speak, so he's not available. But in his stead, we have Farhan Lalji on the phone from Vancouver and Mike Johnson. Fellas, can you both hear me? Everybody can hear everybody?
Oh,
sadly,
clear. Although
yes.
I'm offended that you've been talking a lot about the Canucks. First time I've been on your show. That's offensive.
I guess it is, isn't it? Yeah, you're a busy guy though, Farhan. You know, all the coaching and the kids and the running around and back and forth across the board. You're not an easy guy to nail down, pal.
Oh, that is fair. But when I got to Seattle, my son's got a training session. I got a call. Oh, Horvat's been traded. Oh, good.
Oh, good.
Can't wait for Ryan Rishaug's call.
Just what
And
you
there
need,
it was.
Because Gino Retta and Sports Center and, you know, your own podcast and all that other stuff isn't enough responsibility.
Yeah.
Okay, well, listen, we have limited time here with Mike Johnson, so let's run down this trade real quick. If people have not heard yet, the trade, Bo Horvat, now a member of the New York Islanders. In exchange, the Vancouver Canucks get left winger Anthony Beauvillier, who's got a year left on his deal. Prospect, a second-round pick from 2021, Atu Ratu. He's 6'2", and we'll discuss just what type of prospect he is and where he potentially lands. They also get a first-round pick conditional in this year's draft, top 12 protected. If that pick slides to 2024, it is not protected. So some risk next year, depending on what happens. And then also news breaking out of Lou Lamoriello's press conference that the Canucks are retaining 25% of Bo Horvat's salary. So there is the deal in its entirety. Farhan, you cover the Canucks every day and have so brilliantly for 25 plus years. Your initial instinct when you heard all the details on this deal, my friend?
Well, it's where the Canucks needed to go, right? They're in a situation from a salary cap standpoint where they couldn't continue on with Bo Horvat. They made a decision this summer, and they won't frame it this way, but it's pretty clear that the cap situation from the previous management team left this group in a situation where they had to make a choice, and they chose JT Miller. They were very close to signing Bo Horvat in July. They didn't get done, and I mean, it was very close. And then they quickly pivoted and went in on JT Miller, which surprised a lot of people. And I think they felt coming out of last season that, look, these guys could all play center. It's been pretty clear to this point that JT Miller is not good down the middle. He's a winger. Which is going to leave this organization in a tough spot at the center position, depending on what happens with Ratu here down the road. But for me, it's bittersweet. I mean, you know me, when it comes to the Canucks, I care more about the Vancouver part than the Canuck part, right? So the Canucks needed to make this decision from a salary cap standpoint. In terms of Bo Horvat in Vancouver, this guy is as good as they come. In a room that can be really challenging to cover at times, Bo Horvat is a prince. He is a class act. How many players do you know that could go into the final year of their deal like this? Not like the old days when McGillney used to do it every second year. Like usually the distraction from a situation like this in the Canadian market would weigh you down like nobody's business. And instead, Bo Horvat's had a career year. The odd time he's been in the playoffs, he's performed at a high level. Like he's a captain. He's represented the organization really well. From a cultural standpoint, I think it's unfortunate, but financially, this was the way they had to go. And they needed first-round picks. They needed prospects. They needed more.
Mike, let's talk about the return. What do you think of the return? No contract in place. Lamoriello says they want to get talk started right away. Did they get enough for a player of this caliber, having a career year?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think the Beauvillier contract kind of matches off Horvat's retained contract. So that's probably a financial component. And they get what? The player they were talking about, a prospect that maybe still might hit in Ratu, and that's debatable. And they get a protected first-round pick, like a mid-first-round pick. The one thing I do like about Vancouver and the decision they made is they went for the future. They didn't go get a 25 or 26-year-old. They went for players and picks that will help them 2, 3, 4 years down the road, because that's when they'll be good again. Not next year, not this year. I think that was a good idea. Ratu, obviously had a huge World Junior, scored really well in Europe, hasn't happened at the NHL level, not a great skater, which is the one kind of concern that I would have about him as a prospect and how well he will translate, especially if you plan on playing him in the middle. And then the first round pick will be the first round pick. But I do think at least the philosophy of the trade was the right one for Vancouver.
So, Farhan, we'll get back to you in just 1 second. Johnny, you made a point to me earlier. Lou Lamoriello, there could be some strategy at play here on the timing. So they're going to talk contract, and maybe they can work something out. Maybe they can't. We'll see what happens there. The New York Islanders are not guaranteed to make the playoffs. They're going to be in a fist fight here to get there. By doing the trade now, does Lamoriello open up an interesting option depending on the way it goes?
Maybe this is me galaxy braining it, because if I was in their shoes, this would cross my mind. Let's say you trade him there and you don't light it up and you fall 6-8 points back at the deadline and you can't re-sign him. You can't get him on the deal you want. You could trade him again. You could flip Bo Horvat again to some other team that is interested at the deadline. He's already got 25% retained. You could retain a little bit more and get back all the assets younger. Who knows what you could do there? If you can't sign him, they should absolutely do that. So that kind of crossed my mind. And same thing with Vancouver. I mean, Beauvillier doesn't have to stay in Vancouver. They could trade him along at the deadline as well. So maybe these parts aren't finished moving. I just thought if they can't re-sign him and they haven't really started talking, if you believe that, then that might be an option for Lamoriello.
Really interesting suggestion. Farhan, why were the Canucks not allowing teams to talk to Horvat's camp about an extension? Because conventional wisdom is if you let the two sides talk and they can work out a deal, you get more value back in the trade. Why? They seem stubborn about this one. Why?
It's a great question, and we're going to ask Patrick Alvin about this in about 45 minutes here. It made no sense, and a lot of people felt, and I kind of heard that when they got down to the final short strokes on a deal and they liked the return, that at that point they may open that door up for teams to talk to Pat Morris about an extension. But to my understanding, that didn't happen at any point in this trade. So I'm with you. They should have allowed it. They should have been able to create a bigger market by doing so. I think they felt on some levels that they had lost a level of leverage if they were going to allow that to happen. Doesn't make sense to me at all. And, the concept of flipping, and Johnny, to your point, I think it makes a lot of sense for the Islanders because they've got some time to see how much better they can be with him. Scoring's been a problem for the Islanders right now, and Horvat's scoring at elite level right now. He's 8th in the league in scoring, 31 goals. He's on a career pace. Does great things in the power play, does great things as a faceoff guy. So he can give them their best opportunity to get in. And if not, right, you're right, they can flip him and take some more cap space on and make that situation even more valuable at that point. And from a Canucks standpoint, this isn't about Beauvillier. And it's great that they got a first-round pick because all the dialogue we've been getting from Jim Rutherford has been that isn't their priority. If they can get one, great, but it almost felt like a Beauvillier-type player was their priority. They wanted a guy who could come in and play today. They were talking about, they didn't use this term, but essentially reclamation projects, right? Like high-pedigree guys that didn't work out in their first stop, and maybe they could extract some more out of that player with a second chance. But Ratu is that guy that I think this trade hinges on as far as a player is concerned. I think they do believe in his potential. They're going to need help at center. Because, without Horvat, this organization's got nothing down the middle after Elias Pettersson. So, can he do something? And the pick was important because we didn't get the sense, like I said, that was going to be the priority. So that the fact that they can get all three of those is a good thing. But what was missing was they didn't get a defenseman, and that's a real problem.
Right, and they didn't shed any defense in salary. That's also a bit of a problem for Vancouver. Think about from New York, though, right? We know they cannot score. Bo's scoring a ton this year. They cannot score on the power play. They've been like 3 for the last 56 or whatever it is. Bo Horvat, very good in the power play. And you think Barzal, Horvat, 1-2, 2-1. Like that's a pretty good starting point for New York to kind of turn things around. So we'll see if it works there. But if you think Anthony Beauvillier, who I know has been a highly touted player, but like even if you reclamation project him, Farhan, like what are you talking about? You're talking about a top 6 winger. They got a lot of top 6 wingers. There's Connor Garland, there's Brock Besser, there's JT Miller, there's Kuzmenko. Like they got a lot of guys that kind of do what Beauvillier does. Even if Beauvillier kind of rebounds and gets to where you think he might be able to go, it seems a little redundant as a winger if that's your project when they got a lot of them already on their team.
Well, and they've also got two young guys in Vasily Podkolzin and Niels Hoglander who've been sent down to
those guys too.
That at some point they got to get back up here to see what they can do. And, they just lost Mikheyev for the season, right? But you're right. I mean, when you come into the season, the Canucks, they felt that if Miller could work as a center, that they could have three legitimate lines. And it hasn't worked out that way because Miller wasn't good at center. They've taken Podkolzin and Hoglander and they've sent them down, and it just hasn't worked out. So they've been attempting to manufacture a top six. When Rick Tocchet took over, he put Miller back to the middle and tried to play with three pairs and then throw in whoever they could to flesh out the top three lines. So, you can make the case that there is a spot for him right now, but big picture, if it's me, I'm taking a look at those young guys in a non-pressure environment right now where you could give them some run because it really doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Like, they're miles away from the playoffs. You don't have to sit them or reduce their ice time like Bruce Boudreau did. It's over now as far as the playoffs are concerned. I think they should give those guys some run, and maybe a guy like Beauvillier is kind of in the way of doing that, right?
Johnny, are you understanding the vision?
Go ahead. Not to mention Besser, and because like who are you going to take the ice time from? Like guys who want it, who need it themselves. So that's an issue. Like that's a problem.
And they're going to try to trade Besser, right? Like they are trying actively to trade Besser. There have been no takers. Johnny, certainly if they could move him, that helps.
Johnny, and we'll let you go here. I know you got to run, Johnny, but are you understanding the vision? Like there's been question about the Vancouver Canucks and what is the plan and what is the window and how much has that changed? And even Jim Rutherford in his availability, like major surgery, minor surgery, short-term, long-term. Are you understanding the vision that they have in play here? And do you think this trade is in line with a vision that makes sense?
Well, I mean, yes, in the sense I understand it because they need to get rid of money and they've committed money maybe to the wrong people, but that ship has sailed. So they got to do what they can do right now. I get that part. I don't get the part about getting 25-year-olds who they can reclaim. Like this team, major surgery we're talking about, you're multiple years away from being a contender. I mean, not to make the playoffs, but to be a contender to make the Stanley Cup again. And so acquiring middle-aged talented players doesn't seem like a great idea. I think youth and rebuild, and you're talking about Hoglander, you're talking about Podkolzin, like those are the guys that they're going to build around with going forward to me. So maybe they backed into the right thing with Ratu and a first-round pick. But we'll see what else they do. And also worth noting, like you think of the O'Reilly trade with Buffalo. Sometimes it takes a long time to figure out, how deals shake out. Tage Thompson looks pretty good in Buffalo right now, even though we thought it was a complete bust for years. So these things may take a little while, but I think maybe we also need to wait for all the dominoes to fall. I don't think Vancouver's done. And maybe when the deadline passes, we'll see what the roster looks like. Maybe it makes more sense.
Farhan, thoughts on the bigger picture? Johnny, do you got to bounce? Go ahead if you do, man.
But yeah, I'm really glad that Johnny could explain it to me because the Canucks management team hasn't done a good job of explaining it quite yet, right? So, and to Mike's point, he's right. Like if you bring in a 25-year-old player and all of a sudden they hit, like and even in Beauvillier's case, they got to sign him if all of a sudden it turns out well. And is that where they want to invest their money right now? So, it really, they talked about retool instead of rebuild. None of it has really made sense. I think the market is truly ready for this to be done right. Jim Rutherford in one of his availabilities recently talked about the impatience and how everybody wants this done now. No, they don't. They don't. They want an actual plan, one that makes sense and one they can buy into, and they think they can do it fast. And a lot of people have been critical, Jim Benning with ownership, that he was executing ownership's vision, right? That he essentially went to ownership and said, I can do this faster. They got rid of Trevor Linden, and Jim Benning couldn't execute it, right? And so now it's the same vision, except with a guy that's got 3 Stanley Cup rings and a Hall of Fame resume, but it's the same vision. And this time I don't think it's the owner. I just think Jim Rutherford's in his early 70s and doesn't have the appetite for a 5-year rebuild. So his vision just seems to align with the owner as opposed to the owner driving it, which was the case previously. So it's awkward. And Johnny may be right. They may have backed into the right deal here with a first-round draft pick and if Rocky works out. Because, Beauvillier is the type of player that initially, based on how Rutherford was presenting his plan, was what they wanted. And really, in the end, it might be the third piece out of this deal, right? So, we'll see what it looks like, but it just seems like it's all, wallpaper as opposed to foundation.
What do you think? You talked a little bit about Bo Horvat, what he meant, in that locker room to the city and all that. Like, what do you think the legacy will be of his stay there? I mean, He's been a pretty long time Canuck here, Farhan. You've been dealing with him for a long time. Like, what do you think the legacy of Bo Horvat in Vancouver will be?
Well, from a on-ice perspective, it's not much, right? I mean, he was a very good player here. You can't make the case that he was an elite player, but he was very, very good and brought really good value and played a lot of different roles and provided good leadership. But at the end of the day, they haven't been a playoff team, right? Yeah. I mean, it's been a pretty ugly stretch since they stumbled into the playoffs under Willie Desjardins in 2014, and then we've had one bubble run, and it hasn't been good, right? So I don't think you can hang that on Bo Horvat. But if you look at the Sedins, for example, you're going to tie their legacies to the fact that they were Hall of Fame players who got to a Game 7 of the Stanley Cup and won a couple of President's trophies, won individual trophies with the Hart and the Ross and all of that. And so they were elite, top of league players. That's not going to be what defines Bo Horvat in terms of his legacy, because people will just look at it and say, you're overvaluing a guy that played on a losing team.
Yeah.
But as I said, for me, I just view it so differently because those other parts matter to me as much. And he did everything within his power. He got the most out of his ability. People didn't know when they brought him in. Interestingly enough, Lou Lamoriello is the guy that executed the Schneider for Horvat trade. And it was Schneider for a top-10 draft pick, which turned out to be Horvat, and now they're both there. I think a lot of people were disappointed at the time because Schneider was an elite goaltender then, and people felt that Horvat might not be above a third-line center, that he didn't skate well enough to be better than that. And then eventually Schneider and his injury history makes him an afterthought. Horvat turned into a really good player who can score, can skate, can check, and can do a lot of things. So for me, I just think he's squeezed every drop of juice out of the orange in terms of his ability and has tried to lead in the best possible way. And that's what his legacy will be to me.
When I think of Bo Horvat in that draft, I was working that draft, buddy. I was down on the floor, and Horvat got picked, and he came walking down from the stands and hugged all the family and everything like that. And I was standing there at the time we had the draft on TSN, and he was walking towards the stage, and he took his jacket off, and he was looking around, and he handed me his suit coat. Like he just handed me his suit coat, and I was standing there with a TSM microphone in my hand, and he hands me his suit coat. So I was like, oh, okay.
Oh, did it fit?
Oh no, I didn't put it on. I just I did go through the pockets though, no cash. No, I'm kidding.
That is so good.
So he hands it to me, and I'm standing there, and then I think someone from the Canucks PR staff, I found them and gave them the jacket. But Horvat and I had a good laugh about that after, because he's like, yeah, I didn't know what to do. You just know you can't drag the jacket up onto stage. So. Well, man, listen, Farhan, it's been eventful for you out there big time in Vancouver this year, buddy. Like, of all the markets, I mean, you have a tendency, you can kind of lay a little low in that market at times. Not this year, my friend.
Oh, yeah. For me, it's been normally the last few years, and you know how much I do on the football side.
Yes.
So my hockey season generally goes like this. They go to training camp, and they begin the season, and I'm all in. And then November hits, and I'm covering CFL playoffs. And then after that, I've got NFL playoffs and Super Bowl and, NFL Combine and all this stuff. And by the time I can fully integrate back into the Canucks, they're out of it.
Yeah.
And nobody cares. So I'm not getting a call from Gino, not getting a call from SportsCenter to constantly be on air. And, and it's okay because I need a bit of downtime after all that football stuff. So it's definitely not been that year. And I know you like your got your back stories, so I'll give you one.
I love it. I love it.
You know why I have a full-time on-air job at TSN?
Why is that?
And it's because of Mike Keenan and the most volatile period of the Vancouver Canucks prior to this one was back then. So Mike Keenan came in, and our executive producer at the time who hired me was a guy named Mike Day.
Yeah.
And Mike Day was in Vancouver. And back then we had the Western Broadcast Center, right? Like for that 2 years from 97 to 99 where we split screen Sports Center. Back then it was Sports Desk.
Right.
One host in Vancouver, one in Toronto. And so my job at the time, I was reporting part-time and producing part-time. So it was half on air, half off air. And Mike was in town. And when Keenan was here, every day we had a cycle. He would trade a player. The next day, that new player would go to the airport to send the player off. The next day, the new player would come in. He would practice. They would play in a game, and the next day there was another trade. And it was literally that level of insanity. And Mike was here for a week, and he's like, "We got to get you on air full time. Like, this is crazy. We need you on air full time." So I said, "Okay," and there it went. And I told Keenan that story because I thanked him. I said, "Because of your insanity, I became a full time on air person at TSN." So
that's awesome.
People ask me that compare this era to that era, and like it's tough. Like it's different. Yeah. Right, because there just was such a movement of players back then, but this might be worse because that was so personnel driven, and we had the Trevor Linden and Mark Messier and the captaincy and the Linden trade, and the Bo Horvat trade feels kind of like that because it was Miller or Horvat, right? That's kind of how it went down, right, in terms of salaries. But it's almost worse, right, because you've got the medical stuff, and there's just been so much the Bruce Boudreau and how toxic that whole thing into. So when you add it all in, I almost think this is worse, but it's been a minute since it's been this bad.
Man, I'm used to covering the drama and the downtimes in Edmonton for the decade of darkness. You and I, man, we put in some years covering some pretty mediocre hockey.
Yeah, this feels like pre-2015, pre-McDavid Oilers in terms of lack of direction. And honestly, for the first time in like 8 years covering this 25 at TSN, it actually feels like work.
Well, we'll keep it in perspective. It's we still get to watch hockey games for a living, and we certainly appreciate that. But yeah, man, you go through the grind, and that's the thing is you're not done. Like you got the rest of this season too. So been there, my friend. I've been there covering meaningless hockey, but is what it is. You'll bring your usual vigor to your storytelling, I'm sure.
What's your Super Bowl pick? Your team who's in the game?
Oh, you know what, man? I have been. You know me. I don't have a lot of time in my life for this stuff. So, like, I don't think anybody cares about my Super Bowl pick. I don't know. KC? Yeah. Like, what? No, KC? I'll go KC, but I'm not going to back it up with any logic. Why don't we get you on close to Super Bowl and we can talk? I'll pretend with you. We can talk some NFL football.
All right, buddy. I'll prop you with your questions, too.
All right. Farhan, thank you for doing this on short notice, my friend. And thank you for the Got Your Back story. I loved it. And we'll have you back on the podcast again soon.
All right. Anytime. Take care, my friend.
All right. Cheers, pal. That is the great Farhan Lalji from TSN Vancouver Bureau. Okay. That's going to wrap up the emergency podcast. Big thanks to Mike Johnson. We never got to say a proper goodbye to Johnny. He had to drive his daughter somewhere, so we just kind of hopped right off there. Johnny, thanks for your contribution today. Appreciate it, Farhan, as well. And thanks to our sponsors, Cross Country Canada Supplies and Rentals, Pro Hockey Life, and Liberty Smart Security as well. A full episode is coming your way this week. Likely to drop Tuesday or Wednesday. Got to sort some things out. This Horvat trade has kind of thrown things out of whack. But lots more to come here on Got Your Back this week. Cheers, folks. Have yourselves a fantastic finish to your night.